want to be a baobab processor part 2. This is the episode in which I talk about the mechanics of baobab powder production. Hi guys, my name is Gus Le Breton. I am standing here in beautiful Kilifi on the east coast of Kenya, indeed the east coast of Africa. And this is a little baobab processing plant, and I am here today to talk to you about how baobab powder is extracted either mechanically or manually from the baobab fruit to go to market. And this follows on episode 1, which is about understanding your market and really knowing who you might want to be processing baobab fruit powder for, and who is going to buy your product. So the first part of the process of producing good quality baobab fruit powder is to make sure you've selected the right fruit. There is another video which has already been produced on this, actually also shot here in Kilifi. There's a link probably somewhere down around here which you can click on and you can watch that video if you haven't already seen it. That video will tell you the importance of making sure that you only harvest fruit that are ripe, that you only harvest fruit that have not sustained any external damage or cracks when falling from the tree, that you store the fruit correctly in your home, elevated off the ground, preferably in a dedicated storage space, not inside your house where they might get contaminated with other things. And the critical importance of ensuring that you have a full traceability system set up in your supply chain. Let me just quickly talk you through that word traceability because it is a long one. Traceability means the ability to trace where a product originally comes from. And the principle is very simple. If you have a baobab fruit product and there's something wrong with it, in order to prevent that happening again, you need to know where exactly that fruit came from. It's not a complicated process. It just requires you to make sure that when you buy fruit from a particular location, it is labeled and traceable back to that location, and that you maintain full traceability throughout the production process and even after the final product has gone out onto the market. There are lots of videos and educational resource materials that can go into more detail on traceability. That's not the right time for me to do that right now, but I just needed to highlight the importance of it. Of course, one other critical thing in the harvesting of the fruit is to make sure that the harvesters, the people who actually collected the fruit from the tree and brought it perhaps to you, or they perhaps sold it to someone else that sold it to you, to make sure that those harvesters are getting a fair deal out of collecting and bringing you the fruit, because if they're not, they won't do it again. And the real advantage and the beauty of baobab fruit and fruit processing is the opportunity it provides to create meaningful income for rural people across Africa who have access to the baobab fruit trees. So make sure they're all treated fairly. You have got the fruit in, and now you start on the process of extracting the pulp and seed from the whole fruit. So at this point, very important to make sure that the outer shells of the fruit are completely clean before you cut them open to extract the pulp and seed. Try to cut them as cleanly as possible, either using a machete, a panga, or perhaps a handmade guillotine, specially designed for the purpose, that will cut through the shell neatly and make sure that none of the bits of shell get mixed up with the pulp and seed, because you don't want bits of shell in your final product, because it's going to break the teeth of your customers, and that does not make happy customers. So there's no dirt. The outer part of the shell is clean. It has been cut cleanly. Now you get to extracting the pulp and seed from the outer shell, removing it manually. It's a pretty simple process. Very important that you observe full hygiene throughout the processing, so make sure that you have washed your hands before you're gonna handle raw baobab fruit. Ideally, you're wearing short sleeves so that there's no chance that your sleeves will get caught up in the processing. Remember that baobab fruit powder is a raw product, so the consumer is going to eat it as you produce it. Therefore, it needs to be clean so they don't get sick. It's that simple. So once you have opened up the fruit and you have taken out the pulp and seed, you'll probably want to go through a simple process to remove these fibrous strands, the kind of red fiber, we call it the funicle, that is within the pulp and seed. It's kind of like the pith in an orange that holds the whole thing together, but these red fibers are insoluble, and probably most of your customers don't want to be consuming their powder with these bits of fiber, so the easiest thing to do is to pull them out. I did talk in the previous episode about the fact that you can use this fiber to make a tea and indeed other products, so don't throw it away. It is very useful. So now you've got the pulp and the seed, and there are two processes that you can employ to separate the powder from the seed. One is the traditional manual way, which essentially involves using a pestle and mortar, where you're going to crush the pulp and seed, not too hard because you don't want to break the seed up and contaminate the powder with little bits of the seed coating, but a sort of gentle pounding that will separate the pulp and the seed, and this will produce a perfectly good quality product for home consumption. You're probably not going to be able to sell it on the supermarket shelf if it looks like that, because you will see that there are some impurities in the powder that have come from the seed coat as a result of that pounding. So then the second opportunity, particularly good if you want to produce bigger volumes and perhaps of a slightly higher quality, is a mechanical processing. Now, there are no off-the-shelf baobab processing machines. You can't go in to any agro-processing equipment manufacturer and say, I want a baobab processing machine. They don't exist. But the baobab processing technology is pretty simple, and there are a number of different mechanical processing options that can be adapted to work with baobab. The simplest one is a maize disheller, which is just a round circular drum that's spun around, normally for removing maize from the cob, but it works just as well to separate out the powder from the seed. As this drum rotates, the powder comes out through the drum, the seed stays in the middle, and you get your powder from one end and your seed from the other. Happy days. This machine behind me is a slightly more sophisticated version of the same thing. Ultimately, what's coming out is powder from underneath it, and the seed and other unprocessed particles, bits, coming out from the other end. If you are going to go into industrial production, you'll probably have something that's A, much larger, and B, a little bit more sophisticated to make sure that you're producing absolutely the top quality powder. But the principles are always going to be essentially the same. Now, once you've produced your powder, you then need to check it for quality. And you are looking at 4 quality parameters. Perhaps the first and most obvious is evidence of physical impurities. Is there anything in the powder that shouldn't be there? Your customer doesn't want to eat their powder with a dead fly in it, for example. That is a physical impurity. Make sure there are no dead flies or indeed any other, perhaps particles of shell, particles of seed coating. And it's pretty easy because the powder is fairly light in color and generally the impurities are darker in color, so you can quickly see. Now, moving on to color. Color itself is a key parameter of quality management in baobab powder. And the best quality baobab powder, by and large, is lighter in color. And the reason for that is this. So, like many fruits, when a baobab is opened and left to lie around in the sun, it darkens in color. It's a reaction with the UV light, causes the powder to change color, and it will become a sort of darker, redder color. Now, baobab powder is naturally a fairly creamy color. It's really extremely white. So a certain amount of darkness in the powder is completely fine and normal. But if it's too dark, that tells you probably that it's been exposed to the air for a little bit too long. And that is potentially a problem in that exposure will have resulted in a degradation of the vitamin C in the powder. Of course, vitamin C is one of the big selling points. So if there's no vitamin C because it's been exposed to sunlight, that's not great. But it also might suggest that it's been a little bit left a little bit long, and it's perhaps a little bit old. Baobab powder, by the way, has an extremely long shelf life if it is stored and packed correctly, at least 2 to 3 years. So there are no real issues there, but it does help to make sure that you're using fresh powder that has been handled properly in the beginning. Now, the easy way to make sure that your powder does not get too dark is to minimize the time between cracking open the fruit and then processing the powder. If you crack open the fruit and leave the pulp and seed lying around for days or weeks, it will, of course, slowly get darker. If you crack it open and process it into powder in one smooth move, then there's a lot less chance that the powder will turn a dark color. Another key parameter of quality control for baobab is the microbiology, particularly the molds. Baobab fruit can get moldy, especially if they have accidentally cracked at some point before they were open, and moisture's got in. Then it's very obvious when you open the fruit that it is moldy, and it's critical to make sure that you do not contaminate your powder with moldy baobab, because that, unfortunately, that mold will spread and it will spoil all of your powder. Mold is generally dark, powder is generally light, so again, it's pretty easy to see, but make sure that you are rigorous in your quality control, and if you do have powder with obvious signs of mold, separate it from all the rest of the powder and throw it away. You cannot use that powder. The final parameter of quality for baobab powder is around pesticides, and it's very important to make sure that there are no pesticides that have inadvertently got into your powder, because your customers will not want them there. Now, pesticides do not easily get into baobab because A, they're not used in their production. These baobab fruit are wild harvested. No one puts pesticide on a baobab tree, and also they have a very hard outer shell. So it is unlikely that there will be pesticides in there, but if you stored the baobab at your home in a place where perhaps you're spraying for malaria, mosquitoes, maybe some of that spray got into the baobab, that would be a problem. So very important to try to prevent pesticide contamination of your powder, because your customers will not like it. So once your powder has passed all of those tests, there's no pesticides, there's no mold, the color is okay, and there are no physical impurities, you are ready to pack it and store it prior, of course, to selling it, which ultimately is the entire objective of the exercise. Storage, also very important. Make sure you store it inside, not outside, undercover, so that it's protected from sunlight, because sunlight will cause the powder to change color. So store it in a sealed plastic bag, inside in a dark, cool place where there is no chance that it's going to get wet or humid and therefore moldy, because if it does get wet, it will get moldy and that will spoil your powder. So that's it, guys. The production and processing of baobab fruit powder, it's a potentially very good little business for people all across Africa where baobab trees are found. I have given you the quick lowdown on how to make sure that you're producing decent quality baobab fruit powder. In the third episode, I will now be going on to talk about the baobab seed oil. I hope you've enjoyed it. There's a link somewhere down here that will take you to the next video, and I will see you on the other side. Take it easy.